To review, before you can print, you need to make a rough draft and then separate your layers onto tracing paper. You want to make sure that each piece of tracing paper is a different layer or color of your design. You always want to make your list going from light to dark. If you have the color black in your design or dark outlines of another color, the next step is going to be for you to transfer them to your printing block and then trace them using a Sharpie. Tracing the black outlines is going to help you not make the mistake of accidentally carving out that part of the block before the end. The last color you're going to print is your black, and you don't want to accidentally carve out that part of the block too early. If you don't have black outlines in your design or black at all or a dark color that outlines things, then you can just skip this step and move on to printing your first color. The rule in reduction lino cut printing is that you always print the color before you carve the color. The exception to this rule is white. Because the paper is white, you don't actually need to print it. So if you have white in your design, you're gonna actually carve first and not print first. If you don't have white, then you're gonna print first. In your carving tool, there are two blades. They're located in the handle. One blade is to carve out small, thin lines, and the other is to carve out large areas. To attach the blade, you're gonna need to loosen the top, insert the blade, and then retighten the top. Do not actually remove the top of the carving tool. You just need to loosen it so that you can attach the blade. When carving, only carve deep enough that you're removing the gray. Once you see the white, you've carved deep enough. Now I'm ready to print. The printing supplies that you're gonna need are the following. You're gonna get them in a Ziploc bag. You're gonna have a burnisher, a palette knife, a brayer, a registration frame, a folder with 3 pieces of white paper, a printing plate or palette where you're gonna mix your colors, and then you're gonna need your printing inks. The first layer I'm gonna be printing is the light blue sky. Printing inks are just like acrylic paint. You never wanna use the color straight from the tube. You always wanna customize your color. These printing inks are made to be mixed. You also want to start with your lightest value so that you can gradually work to your darker values, making sure that you're getting good contrast between your layers. So on your printing ink, the clear tray, you're gonna mix your printing inks. Notice that I'm customizing the color. Once I've got my ink mix, I'm gonna push most of the ink to the top of my plate and then also evenly distribute it. This way, when I put the brayer on, I'll be able to evenly distribute the ink onto the brayer. You wanna just get a nice thin layer of the ink across the entire brayer. You don't want to over ink it to the point where it's all goopy and you have so much ink on it that when you roll it on your plate, you're gonna get all of that ink into the areas that you just carved out, and then they're not gonna show up on your picture. Once you've rolled it, you're gonna place it inside your registration frame, and then you're gonna place the piece of white paper so that it lines up with that registration frame. That's how you're gonna get your print right in the center of your paper. Once you have your piece of white paper down, you're gonna use the burnishing tool to rub that over top of the white paper. That is gonna force the ink into your paper. It's really important that you burnish as much as possible. That's the key to getting a good print. Not so much the amount of ink that you put on there. In fact, if you put too much ink on it, it's not gonna be a good print. You wanna make sure that you're burnishing, and that's gonna push that ink into the paper. If you have so much ink on your plate that it has filled the parts that you have scratched out or that you've removed, then you're gonna need to go wash your plate and you're gonna need to re-ink it with the appropriate amount of ink. The more you burnish, the better. So you're gonna print on all 3 pieces of your white paper, each time re-rolling ink onto the plate. And then the last thing you're gonna do is you're gonna print onto your folder. Make sure you're printing onto the front of the folder so that you have your image on the front. Now that I have my first color printed, I'm gonna head over to the sink and I'm gonna wash and I'm gonna dry all my supplies. Once my supplies are dry, you can see that the graphite pencil or the Sharpie marker is still on my block, so I can still make sure that I'm not gonna carve out any of the black parts, since that's the last thing I want standing. But now I'm ready to go ahead and I'm gonna carve out the color that I just printed. Remember, you always print the color before you carve it out. So I took the light blue sky color, that layer, and I transferred the graphite to my printing block. And now I'm gonna remove everything that I wanna keep that color, which is the sky color. So I'm gonna use the larger blade and I'm gonna remove all the area of my picture that is the sky. And now I'm done with that layer. So now I'm ready to print my next color. So I'm gonna repeat that same process. I'm gonna custom mix my colors. Remember, you don't ever wanna use a color straight from the tube. For this one, this is my water layer. And for my water layer, I actually have an ombre look. I have a transition from light to dark blue. So notice that I'm actually mixing up two different sides of blue. One half of my printing plate here, or my mixing tray, is gonna be my light blue, and the other half of my mixing tray is gonna be my dark blue. So I'm just gonna mix those inks up side by side, and I'm gonna try and distribute the ink evenly between the two. Then I'm gonna roll my brayer so that half of my brayer has the light color and half of my brayer has the dark color, and I'm gonna roll that ink onto my printing plate so that those two colors start to mix in the middle. Once I have my ink rolled out, I'm gonna place it inside my registration frame. I'm gonna put my piece of paper, lining it up. I'm gonna burnish again. You wanna make sure that you are burnishing. The more you burnish, the better. And then that second layer is gonna cover the first layer, except for the areas that I carved out, the parts that I wanted to keep that color. So I'm gonna repeat this process for my other two prints. And then I'm also going to print, of course, on my folder. Now that I've printed on all three pieces of paper and my folder, I'm gonna wash all my supplies again. I'm gonna make sure that they are all dry. And then I'm going to carve out the part of the block that I wanna keep that blue color, which is the watercolor. So remember, you always print the color before you carve the color. So now I'm gonna transfer my layer of graphite to my block that will show me what areas I wanna carve out for my water. So now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna carve out everything that I wanna keep that blue color, because I printed the color and now I'm gonna carve out the color. Once I've got all the area that is gonna be the water carved out, I'm ready to print my next color. So my next color that I'm gonna be printing is my green color. So again, I wanna make sure that I'm getting some good contrast from that last color. So if the color is too dark in my last layer, then I probably wanna mix a lighter color so that I'm getting some contrast from it. Remember, again, I customized my color. I spread it out equally onto my mixing tray, and now I'm gonna use my brayer to go over the entire block. I line up my paper, I'm gonna burnish, and then I'm gonna print on all three pieces of paper, and then I'm also gonna print on my folder. After printing on my folder, of course, I'm gonna go back to the sink. I'm gonna wash and dry all my supplies. And now I'm ready to carve out my last piece. Remember, we always print the color before we carve the color. So now I'm ready to carve out everything in my picture that I wanna keep green. In this layer, I'm gonna have to be really careful about the way I carve. I want to make sure that I'm not carving out any of those black lines. So I've got to work around all of those black lines and only remove the area of the grass that is green and not the actual black outline. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to just use straight up black ink. I'm not going to color mix it this time. I want to make sure that I'm getting that contrast. I'm going to re-ink my plate, and I'm going to print my plate onto my 3 pieces of paper. The black is going to really pull the whole picture together. I, of course, want to print on my folder. And then before I call this project finished, I'm going to need to title, number, and sign each of my prints. The title is going to go first. You should title all 3 of your prints the same. The number is going to go in the middle. It's written like a fraction. 1/3 is your best print, 2/3 is your second best print, and 3/3 is your third best print. Once you've completed that, then you can call this project complete.